Let's talk now to our political panel. Sue Moroney and Brigitte Morten with us. Sue is a former MP with the Labour Party, now Chief Executive of Community Law Centres Aotearoa. And Brigitte Morten, a director with public and commercial law firm Franks Ogilvie, a former senior ministerial advisor for the previous national-led government, a National Party member, and also volunteers for the party's deputy leader, Nicola Willis. Kia ora korua.
Morena.
Morena, Susie.
Lovely
Morena,
to have you
Bridget.
with us. Lovely to have you with us this morning. I guess we have to start with something which has just come out this morning. People still working through the details of it. But NCEA changing by the looks of things, or indeed being scrapped altogether. I guess, first of all, Brigitte, what have you seen of these changes and what do you make of Erica Stanford's proposals?
Yeah, I think they are very strong proposals. They clearly speak to the concerns that have been raised consistently for many years by employers, by our tertiary institutions and by parents about NCEA and it not delivering those foundational skills that we want our young people to leaving school with. I think many people will find the proposals, seem pretty reasonable and sensible because they look a bit more like what many of us went through school, through the school C and bursary system. I think, it also maintains that we get back to those basics about literacy and numeracy and make sure that actually those kids have that foundational year at year 11 to get those foundational skills that they need.
Sue, what's your take?
Well, it's a really large and comprehensive change, not enough detail to understand what is driving this, but it does appear to me to be more about virtue signalling than about being based on research and evidence about what works. So I haven't heard any reference in the announcement to this is what happens in another country and so we can see that it works, or anything that tells us that there is good research and evidence that supports this approach. So we've already spent $158 million through the Ministry of Education between 2021 and 2024, preparing for a different review of NCEA Level 1 and 2, and then the government's come sideways with this proposal. So yet to be convinced that it's a good spend of taxpayer money and that it's based on research and evidence.
Yeah, I suppose on that, the Minister did tell 9 to Noon a little bit earlier on this morning, around half an hour ago, that it is based on data from NZQA, that it's very much grounded in data rather than anecdotes. The money certainly seems to be less than clear at this stage, but I guess still quite a lot of time for this proposal to roll out.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what the data says.
Yeah, I think that the data is quite strong and it's very clear in the discussion document that is very detailed, that there is data to support the fact that NCEA is not delivering, particularly for our most vulnerable students. And I think that is where we need to be most concerned. I think it's also clearly not being delivering according to NZQA's study based on our students who need to achieve higher. And you can see that by the fact that so many of our schools are now voting with their feet and looking for, IB or Cambridge exams to set their kids up. I think it's wrong to say that that's not based on data or there's not a lot of detail. I think there's been a swamp of data out this morning. I certainly have not got myself across all the information yet, but there is significant information being put out there about these proposals.
Sue, do you have a further comment you want to make about the changes to NCEA?
Oh, look, just, watch the space, because I think that it does seem quite ideologically driven at this point. But as more information comes out, perhaps they have already done all the work. But, the last thing that I know about what was going on in this space was that the Ministry of Education was planning to review levels 1 and 2 rather than throw them out completely. So the throw them out completely approach does need to be explained, and there does need to be really strong data and research and evidence that underpins that. And also, it'd be interesting to hear what the commentary is from the people who, from teachers and those professionals that are actually supposed to be providing the curriculum for students, to see what their views are.
Let's talk a little bit about the National Party Conference, because I'm sure there is a lot more to come on NCEA, and we will indeed be talking about it, I'm sure, on 9 to Noon in the future. But the National Party Conference taking place over the weekend down in Christchurch. Brigitte, I don't think you were there this time, but nonetheless, what did you make of what was being said down there, and I guess some of what you've heard from people who were in the room?
Yeah, I think I'm always conscious with National Party conferences, as like any political party conference. They're not really built for external or for media. They are about your supporters, your volunteers. It's about speaking to the people that are the loyal voters. So you can see consistency of that message coming through, through Luxon's speeches, along with all the number of panels throughout the day. It was directed at National Party members. So I think there was a strong showing. I think there was a strong conference. But to pick up any sort of more about, what that says about Luxon's leadership or support, I think is probably a bit of an overreach.
Sue, what did you have to think of this? Because certainly there's been a lot of commentary leading up to this about Christopher Luxon and his leadership style. What was your sense of what you were seeing, perhaps of some of those speeches, particularly on the news, and the sense coming from the National Party?
Well, first of all, it's curious that they had reduced it from being a conference that's normally held over an entire weekend to being a one-day conference. So, to think that that's focused on the members and their input into it doesn't seem quite right, given that it was reduced and truncated. Maybe the government's tired and it hasn't got much to be thinking about, but I think the New Zealand public thinks that there's a lot to be thinking about and a lot to be discussing. So that was interesting for a start. It was terrible timing for the National Party. They go into their conference weekend. They've had 15% tariffs slapped on by the US government. They had, Chris Bishop on being interviewed and starting to backtrack on their emergency housing provisions. So not too much is going right for the government at the moment, and here they are, with the economy not performing. And I thought that Christopher Luxon's speeches around the economy seem to be trying to move the responsibility from the government onto everyone else. I note that his commentary seemed to be about that everyone else, people in New Zealand need to say yes more, was the thing that we're going to do to turn around the economy. No plan from the government, nothing spelling out how they are going to actually fix the economy after carefully having orchestrated and really hitched their post to the fact that the economy was going to improve this year and that was going to be a success for the government. Now that it hasn't improved, they're trying to distance themselves from being involved in that at all, and still no plan.
I think it's, first we're touching on is a reduction to one-day conference. That was actually member-led because the cost of conferences are so high, the cost of events are so high, and the pressure that puts on your members for travel, for accommodation, the cost of attending multi-day events. So that was actually a member-led driven. I think to try and draw some sort of conspiracy about the fact that the government is tired, therefore they made it a one-day conference is just completely, frankly, a little bit bonkers. I think we need to then focus on there being no plan. I think the government has been really clear that what they're doing about driving the economy is looking directly at inflation, which has come down under this government. They are looking at reforming things like a critical education sector. They are looking at RMA reform. They are looking at driving jobs. I don't think it's fair to say they don't have a plan. Is it really tough? Extremely tough, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a plan. I think in some ways they've had too many announcements over the last couple of weeks about what they're actually doing, and you can see that in the commentary. I think there was a lot of pushback from the press gallery last week about, post-cabinet media conference because they reckoned the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance talked too much about what they were doing on the cost of living.
Is there a danger, though, with the situation with the economy and Christopher Luxon particularly sort of hitching his wagon to the economic upturn on this? Because, with those UF tariffs coming on and that uncertainty, we really don't know where the economy is going to be, do we?
Yeah, I think absolutely there is a political danger in that. Unfortunately, I think it's an unavoidable danger, regardless of whether it was National or Labour that's in government. We had the last election in very tough economic circumstances. We knew that it was going to get worse in some ways before it got better. And I think everyone, the biggest issue, you can see it consistently through focus groups and polling, that the economy is the biggest issue for voters. So there's no doubt that the political success of the government is tied to economic recovery, but I don't think it's fair to say that they don't have a plan to actually address that.
Sue?
Well, it's not working, if I can put it that way. It's hard to actually identify what the plan is, apart from quite, things around the edges, having announcements like that you can drink alcohol at the hairdressers or you can bring your dog along to the hairdressers, those types of things. That's not a plan to actually address the economy. And I can't see, and this weekend at the conference was the place to clearly spell out what that program was, and that didn't happen. There was no clearly articulated plan of what the government is going to do to address the economy.
Brigitte, I guess the situation as well with homelessness, though, and Chris Bishop having to walk back some of the areas. This is something that is potentially becoming a bit of a running sore for the government, because the situation with homelessness doesn't go away simply if emergency housing is stopped or taken away or reduced.
No, and I think it does demonstrate also how hard it is to measure homelessness. And the fact that we don't actually have a clear understanding about what's happening, because these people are our most vulnerable and the ones that are often most disconnected from government service delivery. I think it is really hard for the government to really authoritatively say whether or not homelessness has gone up or not. But I mean, without a doubt, I think people can look around with their own eyes and see that it's tough for many families out there and that there's many more families struggling. And if that means that there's more housing uncertainty, I think that means for the government that they do have to be clearer about emergency housing and what they're doing to make sure that people aren't falling through the cracks, that there is still that housing available for them. And unfortunately, the changes that they are making to our housing supply cannot come fast enough. And I think that's always going to be a bit of a difficulty for the government when talking about this.
But the government's actually put the building of more than 500 social housing units throughout New Zealand on hold or cancelled them completely. So they're actually causing more of a problem for housing supply. All of those units and those houses were ready to go. So they've had millions of dollars spent on doing all the resource consents, all the planning, all the designing, and all of that now is being wasted because the government has put the actual building of those houses on hold. Now that means that more than 2,000 New Zealanders will be homeless as a result of those programs not going ahead. So the government itself is making decisions that is reducing the supply of housing available for those most in need, and at the same time making it harder for them to get into emergency housing. So it's not rocket science to actually work out that when you put that picture together, that of course homelessness is going to increase on our streets. And Brigitte, you're right, people can see it visibly with their own eyes. So, ministers trying to say that it's what people can see right in front of them is not true, just actually undermines their whole credibility.
Sue, what did you make of some of the announcements being made last week about health and safety? This was something that there seemed to be a new announcement every day, or perhaps it was an announcement about a consultation continuing that was going on. How did that land?
Yeah, it was an announcement about starting to talk to people. And the people that they're starting to talk to are employers, not workers. I really noticed that in all of the discussion about who we're going to start talking to about a range of problems that may not even exist. In no part of that did they talk about talking with workers or workers' organisations. And so, of course, when you talk only to one side of the equation, and that side of the equation has a financial motive to perhaps not address health and safety issues as much as may be required, then it's never going to go well. It's not going to be an outcome that actually addresses the issue. It also looked like a range of problems being put in front of the New Zealand public that, that they're now looking for a solution for. I don't think that some of those problems actually do exist. They're now being trumped up as being problems, like, children not being able to collect hen's eggs on a farm. Who knew that was a problem to be solved? So, again, I'd put it into that bracket of what David Seymour did about hairdressers. Who knew that not being able to drink alcohol or bring your dog to the hairdressers was actually a problem that affected us? But ACT's going to get in there and fix it. I think it's quite politically clever, though, in that they are now giving themselves an opportunity to network very deliberately and very strongly with some of National's core support bases by doing this work in health and safety with employers in those various fields that they outlined.
Brigitte, what's your view of this?
Well, I don't think it's correct to say that health and safety regulation is a made-up problem. I think it's been really clear for many years that health and safety is holding back our productivity. And I don't think there's a very small number of employers out there who want to put their employees either negligently or intentionally in any harm's way. What's holding us back is numerous amounts of paperwork and unclear guidelines and manuals. And pointing to that farming health and sector consultation, I think, is a perfect example. I do think the minister misstepped on how she communicated. It should not have been about collecting eggs and those types of things. It should have been talking about heavy machinery and actually the risk on farm. But I do think at the core of it, you could clearly see a problem raised by the rural sector directly, that they had unclear guidance on what should be happening around children on farms and what they could and couldn't be involved with. And that needed to be cleared up. And that is what they're addressing. And I think that's what you see in this deregulation space, is that industry sector by sector. Yes, I am not personally affected or really feel the effect of having, hairdressing regulation, because I don't run a hairdressing business. So I think, but for that sector, getting rid of, compulsory number of sinks and some of those silly things has actually made it much easier for them to operate. And I think it's a bit short-sighted for us to say that it's a made-up problem just because it doesn't affect us directly.
But are some of those issues really being grappled with when it comes to health and safety, when it comes to things like quad bikes?
Well, I think the quad bikes is a good example about what is really dangerous in sort of on farm, and we see a number of mistakes. But I think you can see from the farming sector that actually there's been a bit of cultural change around the use of quad bikes. That you're seeing actually helmets becoming much more used, actually different vehicles used instead. So I think there's a driving cultural change, which doesn't necessarily driven by a manual or a set of regulations or rules. It's actually driven by people, as I say, mostly employers and people that are self-employed, going, actually, how can I minimise harm in the environment that I work?
So I'll be interested to know what... Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, and yet we continue to have people killed on quad bikes far too regularly in this country. I don't know that there's any evidence to support the fact that there has been cultural change in the nature that you described, Brigitte. I'd like to think so, but when I see continually deaths from quad bikes in that sector, it seems like nothing has changed at all in terms of outcomes. So, while the government's looking to tinker around the edges of health and safety, some of these substantial issues continue, and that's where the real harm is.
Something that has changed, we learned some more about how that pay equity law rollback came about. Sue, what is your reading of this? I guess particularly from your your time as an MP, but also the area that you work in now.
Oh, look, it's a complete nonsense to suggest that the details of that cancelling of pay equity claims was kept secret so that new claims couldn't be made. Anyone who makes that claim does not understand the work involved in bringing about a pay equity claim. They take months, if not more than a year, for a claim to be brought together. So this idea that if people knew that the change was imminent, that they would put all these claims forward suddenly is just a nonsense, and it's an excuse for a very secretive and underhanded process that the government undertook to keep this secret and to keep it away from having any public comment or involvement before they changed the law. Also, it's a terrible look for the government to have stopped pay equity for women working in areas like support care, looking after people with disabilities and our elderly and some of the most vulnerable in our community, while at the same time, again, quite secretly, giving their mates that they have put on boards up to 80% increases in the remuneration for, attending a board meeting, reading some papers, doing that type of work. It just demonstrates everything that's wrong about this government.
Brigitte, what was your sense of how that information landed when we heard that it was all, even it had a code name, Project 10?
Yeah, I don't think there was anything new out of that official information release that we didn't really know. We knew it was a really closed secret in terms of that announcement, that it was something that was pushed through in a day. So I don't think that gave us any more information about how that came about. I do think, though, it does demonstrate, as Sue has said, that there is a difficulty for this government in how they address this pay equity. I think the sort of that rushed announcement has meant that many women out there are mistakenly of the belief that this government doesn't believe in pay equality and actually what the changes are, and that lack of nuance has been lost because we haven't had the discussion and the debate. And I think that's the real lost opportunity for the government here.
A quick word finally.
When the Prime Minister gets booed at the netball and at the World of Wearable Arts, the government has got a very big problem, because that is not something that is normal. That's not something that happens in those sorts of environments. Women are very, very angry.
I'd just be interested, before we jump out of this, your take, perhaps, Brigitte, on the oil and gas ban being overturned and what that will actually substantively mean.
Well, I think it's a real difficulty for this government, because we know that they can make the legislative change here, but unfortunately, while Labor and the Greens continue to say that they will not support actually investment in this space, there is a massive risk. And, if you're a company to come here and actually invest, you're very unlikely to do so when there is that sovereign risk given by the sort of flip-flopping by governments.
Sue, what is your take on having this overturned? Is it something that is inevitably going to go back and forth with the colour of the government?
Yes, and I think that no one would expect otherwise, because it would be akin to the national government thinking, Labor thinking that they could get a national government to agree to a ban forever and a day in this space. It is an important area that differentiates the two types of governments, and I think it's important that remains, because that is honestly what those governments believe in, or those two parties believe in, and it's a point of differentiation that's important for the electorate to understand. So it's pretty naive to think that from National that they would get Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori to actually say forever and a day we're never banning this type of activity in our country that causes environmental harm. It's just not ever going to happen.
Thank you to both of you, Sue Moroney there, and also we were speaking with Brigitte Morten on politics.